Yeah. Now in today's session we are going to discuss about the data hierarchy trees and Web Dynpro context. So now in today's session we are going to discuss about the context properties more in depth. So let's go into the SAP system. Yes, let's go to the Web Dynpro component. Launch the SCAT transaction code. Select the Web Dynpro component or interface. Let me create a new Web Dynpro component. Click on yes. Enter the proper window name with proper naming conventions. Click OK. Package. Yeah, for the time being, save it as local object. Okay. Now, as soon as you create a Web Dynpro component, activate the Web Dynpro component. Click OK. Right click on the Web Dynpro component. Mouse right click on the Web Dynpro component and just activate it. Okay. So now when Web Dynpro component has been created, as we discussed in the earlier session, we will have four controllers created automatically: component controller, interface controller, view controller, and window controller. So for every view there will be a view controller associated. For every window there will be a window controller associated. But interface controller will be only one for every component. Component controller is also only one for every component. Okay, now just go to component controller. Now, as I said, context is a data repository in Web Dynpro ABAP. Context is a data repository in Web Dynpro ABAP. Now we see how to create a context, what are all we can create for context, and what are all the properties of the context. Okay, now just go to change mode. Now to create a context, just come here. You see the root name, the context root name as context only. Okay, so just right click on the context, mouse right click on the context, you will see the context menu. Okay, so create node or attribute. You can create a node and you can create an attribute also. Okay, so if you want to create using the wizard, you can create using the wizard. Okay, if you want to change anything of the context, you can change, you can display them. Okay, now just click on create. I'm just trying to create a context node. Okay, just click on create context node. So when you're going to create a context node, you will see list of properties for a context node. Okay, so here you can specify the context node name, material details. Okay, I can specify the node name. See here there are list of properties available for a context. So this is another important interview question, that what are the available properties for a context node. Okay, so these are the properties available for context node: interface node, input element, cardinality, selection, initialization lead selection, singleton, supply function. Okay, so now I will explain you one by one the significance of each property. Now, interface node, here you have two values available in the drop down, no and s. By default it comes with no. Okay, so now what is the what if you say yes, what if you say no for interface node property. Now I said interface controller. Okay, so now I mean there is a controller available in types of controllers. One is interface controller. Now what happens is, when you say interface node as s, so now this node will become available in interface controller. Okay, so now I will show you when you say yes what happens. Okay, now for the time being I'm just setting it as no, interface node as no. Okay, so the purpose of interface controller is to establish a communication between two different components. So now I mean, in further sessions you will understand the real usage of interface node. Okay, interface node, for the time being I'm saying setting it as interface node as no, input element as no. The purpose of input element is, I mean, if you want to, if you are designing a screen layout with input field, and then if you say here in the node input element as no, you can use this node for displaying the, I mean, for input fields as well as text views also. But if you say input element as yes, then you should use this node only for input fields, only for giving the data, only for giving the input. So that is what by default input element will be set as no. So if you set the input element property as no, you can use this context node for input fields, I mean, where you can enter the data, and text views where you can only display the data but cannot enter the data. Okay, so I'm setting the input element as no. And dictionary structure, it is similar to module pool program only. In module pool program, while designing the screen, you can just go to a dictionary structure and then select the list of fields which you want to display it on the screen. So similar way here also you can take the required fields from the dictionary structure and you can design the screen. Okay, to here you will build the context node. Now you can see cardinality. This is more important property for a context node. Cardinality, what is the cardinality? Cardinality defines the relationship between, defines the relation, defines the importance of context node, behavior of the context node. Cardinality has four properties, four values available: 0 to 1, 1 to 1, 0 to n, 1 to n. Okay, so now I said the context is data repository. Context is a data repository in Web Dynpro ABAP. Under context you can create context node and you can create a context attribute. Now context attribute is one single attribute. It is something like variable. Okay, variable or reference variable. But coming to the context node can act as an internal table, can act as a work area or structure. Now how the one single context node can work as a internal table and can work as a structure or work area, that is depending on the cardinality property. So depending on the cardinality property, the behavior of the context node will be defined. Okay, so if you set the cardinality as 0 to 1 or 1 to 1, it means you can create either no instance or maximum one instance for this context node. Instance in the sense, like in terms of ABAP, you can have under this within this context node, you can store no record or maximum one record only. This context node can contain either no record or maximum one record only when you set the cardinality to 0 to 1. When you set the cardinality to 1 to 1, the context node should be filled with at least one record. Context node should consist at least one instance. Okay, in Web Dynpro ABAP is designed based on the object oriented paradigm. So here the terminology we use is like instance. Okay, but to make us understand, I am just calling it as record. Okay, like internal table. Okay, so now 0 to 1, if you set the cardinality of context node to 0 to 1, then the context node can hold no record or maximum one record. When you set the context node cardinality to 1 to 1, it it should contain at no one only one record, one record max, at least one record, maximum one record. Okay, now when you set the cardinality to 0 to n of the context node, it should contain no record or maximum n number of records. So it means, like, when you set the 0 to n property, when you set the cardinality of context node to 0 to n, now the context node can hold multiple instances, more than one instance, more than one record, multiple records. So now it works as an internal table. And when you set the cardinality of context node as 1 to n, context node should at least contain one record or can have n number of records. So in short, when you set the cardinality of context node to 0 to 1 or 1 to 1, it behaves like a structure or work area. When you set the cardinality of context node to 0 to n or 1 to n, it behaves like an internal table. So this is what the importance of cardinality here. So now for the time being, I'm just setting it as 1 to 1. And selection property here. Now the importance of selection property is only with tables. Okay, table, what is the purpose of table? I mean, normal table. Maybe you can say ALV table, or you can say normal table, table control. Okay, so I mean, similar like module program, you can have normal table control, and you can also display ALV table there using oops ALV. Okay, so now coming here, we talk about Web Dynpro ABAP here. So selection property is applicable for table control. So in table control, here it is also selection cardinality. When you set the selection cardinality as 0 to 1, so in table control, you can have no record selection, or maximum only one record can be selected in the table control. When you set the selection cardinality of context node as 1 to 1, there should be at least one record selected and maximum one record selected in the table control always. Okay, I mean, so it means when you set the selection cardinality of context node to be 0 to 1 or 1 to 1, so you can select only one record, maximum one record in the table control. But when you set the selection cardinality of context node to 0 to n or 1 to n, you can select multiple records, more than one record in a table control. So this is what the selection cardinality property of context node. So now for the time being, I'm setting it as 0 to 1. Initialization lead selection, this is also applicable to table control only. So when you here also you will see no and s. So by default it is set to s. So in the table control, whether you want to make the default selection or not, when you display a table control, you want the by default at least one record to be selected or not to be selected. So that depends on the initialization lead selection property. Okay, I will show you practically the impact of these properties. And now singleton is a more important property of the context node. So that we have a separate topic on singleton, so we will discuss that later. Here also you will see no and s properties. Supply function. Now the purpose of supply function is to provide the data into context node by default. If you want, I mean, it's something like, let me just again compare with the ABAP programming. Let's say for example you are designing a selection screen, so you are using a parameter statement, but when selection screen is being displayed, you want to display some default value in the parameter selection screen. What do you do? In the parameter statement you will say at default some value. So here when you display a screen output in the Web Dynpro application, if you want to display some default data in the screen fields, you can use this apply function. You can use this apply function to populate the default values into the context node. Okay, and supply function can also be used in conjunction with singleton property. Okay, so it is extensive and more purposeful when you use the supply function with singleton property. So for the time being I'm not just giving the any supply function here. Okay, so these are the properties available for the context node. Okay, here you can create a context node referring to the dictionary structure without referring to the dictionary structure also. So let me just create a context node without referring to the dictionary structure first, and then just click on continue. Okay, so now context node has been created. Here you can see the context node properties. Same properties are available here. Whenever you want to change the properties of the context node, you can change it here. Okay, now I'm just creating a context node with referring to the dictionary structure now. Okay, okay, now same properties. Here I would say Mara. I will enter the dictionary database table, transparent table, Mara. Now here, since you have entered the dictionary structure as Mara, you can just click on the second button, add attributes from structure. Okay, I'm just clicking on the add attributes from structure. Now you see all the fields of the Mara table are displayed in a pop-up. Now you can select the required fields which you want to be created as context attributes in the context under the context node. Okay, Matner, Ernum, Anum, MDRT, Matkal. Okay, that's all for the time being. Click continue. Yes, now you can see. So under this context node you can see Matner, Ernum, Anum, MTRT, Matkal. The selected fields in the Mara from the Mara table are displayed here. So now these are called as context attributes. So these are called as context attributes. See here, what is Matner? Matner attribute name, type Mara Matner, and you can set it as read only. You can give the default value. You can give you want to null value. So here these are the properties available for the context attributes. So context attributes can be created in two different ways. One is from dictionary structure, one is without dictionary structure also. So this context node have been created using the dictionary structure, but the above one without dictionary structure. So let me create a context attributes under this context node. So to create a context attribute, just right click on the context node and click on create attribute. Okay, so now here I will enter name. Okay, or I can enter Matner only. Okay, so type I can say Mara Matner. Here I can say Mara Matner, and see these are the context attribute properties. Context attribute properties, type or type reference to. I said either you can create a variable or you can create a reference variable. Okay, so type Mara Matner. If it is type ref to, you should give a class name or interface name here. Okay, so read only property. If you set the read only property to S, so always this attribute can be used only as a display only field. Okay, display only for. Now automatic input help mode. So here you see input help modes are available. Different help modes are available. It's like search help. Okay, we will discuss this input help modes. We have a different unit. Okay, now you can just click on OK. Now again, if I want to create another attribute, I have to follow the same steps again. Create attribute, name, I can say char 10. Okay, char 10 is a predefined data element. I can say OK. So here you can see maintainer and name. Okay, so you can see the context attribute properties here. So likewise, you can create a context node with reference to dictionary structure, without reference to dictionary structure. If it is with reference to dictionary structure, you can select it from the dictionary structure what are all the fields to be displayed as context attributes under the context node. So this is example, and this is context node without referring to the dictionary structure. In this case, we have to create context attributes manually one by one. Okay, so like this. So this is the context. Now how to use this context? So now there are three different concepts which every Web Dynpro ABAP developer should know. These three are context binding, context mapping, context binding, and data binding. Okay, so most important basic interview question in Web Dynpro ABAP is these three can be asked as a interview questions. What is context mapping? What is context binding? What is data binding? Okay, so now we are going to discuss about these three different concepts. Now, what is context mapping? Context mapping are again divided into two different things: internal context mapping, external context mapping. Internal context mapping is something like mapping the context from one controller to the another controller within the Web Dynpro component. Mapping the context from one controller to the another controller within the Web Dynpro component is called as internal context mapping. Okay, so mapping the context from one controller to the another controller across the components is called as external context mapping. I mean, like from there is a component 1 and component 2. So component 1 is trying to access the context node of component 2. So this is called as external context mapping. So how context mapping can be done, that I will explain you. But before to that, why is context mapping required? So now let's say, for example, here I said component controller is a global controller. Okay, context is a data repository. It's similar like internal table in a normal report program. Okay, so it holds the data until the Web Dynpro application is alive. Until the Web Dynpro application is active, the entire data is held in the context level. Okay, so now why context mapping is required, I will explain you. Context mapping is required to I mean to make use of the context which is created in the component controller across the other controllers. We have to do the context mapping. Okay, so let me show you example. Now the context material details is created in the component controller context level. In view also, let me save it. Okay, in view also I have a context. But what is the difference between context created in the view and context created in the component controller? Sorry. If you create a context in component controller that is global, if you create a context in the view that is local to that particular view only. So when I already have the context created in the component controller, why should I create the context in view controller again? So instead I will do context mapping. Mapping the context from one controller to the another controller is called as internal context mapping. So how to do the context mapping? Just please follow me. Here you can see right side the component controller. This is global controller. So whatever you create in the global controller, that is accessible, that is visible outside the component controller, also accessible within the entire Web Dynpro component. So now I am just doing the context mapping. So just click on this, drag and drop it, just drag and drop it. See, mapping for context element, context is defined. Material details, you just do select it, drag and drop it on the context of view controller. So now instead of creating another context in the view controller, you can make use of the context which is created in the component controller in the view controller as well. I mean, like, it is global. Since it is global, you can access the same context at the view controller also. If at all required, if you feel that the particular context is only required at the view level, then you can create the context in particular view. If you want, I mean, let me just clear, I mean, maybe somebody have doubt, why should I create context in component controller? I will create context node in view controller only. Yes, you can create context node in view controller also, but the advantage of creating a context node in component controller is, like, in particular Web Dynpro component, when you have 10 views, multiple views are there in one particular component, two more than one view is trying to make use of the same context node in two or three views. Okay, two or three different views are trying to need same information. So instead of creating instead of creating the same context node in individual views, if you create the context node in component controller, that can be shared across all the views of a Web Dynpro component. Okay, so that is what the advantage of creating a context node in component controller. And SAP best practices recommends you always create a context node in component controller, so that maintenance will be very easy. Because, I mean, let's say, for example, during development, uh, as per the given scenario during development, you can create you might create a context node in a view level, but during maintenance time or during support time, you might come across with a situation where same node is required to be used in another view. So then, if the context node is created in view level, so that is accessible within the view, so in order to achieve the expectation, you will have to create a similar context node in another view. So instead of creating a context node once again during support or maintenance, rather during development itself, if you create a context node in component controller, so that in future, if you come across with any such situation where the context node can be utilized, can might be needed in two different views, so then it suffices the requirement if you create the context node in component controller. Okay, so now we have done the context mapping. This is called as internal context mapping. Now I'm just going to the layout. So here we design the screen layout. Now context mapping is done. What is context mapping? Once again, context mapping are two different ways: internal context mapping and external context mapping. mapping the context from one controller to the another controller within the Web Dynpro component is called as internal context mapping. Mapping the context from one controller to the another controller across the components is called as external context mapping. So now you can answer the if somebody asks you a question what is a context mapping, you can now you should be able to answer the question. Okay, now we are going to the context binding. What is the context binding? Let's say, yeah, I mean, once again I'm just going to the modulable program. In modulable program you can design the screen layout, or let me just take the example of normal report program. Okay, so in report program, if you are designing a selection screen, how do you design the selection screen? You create a executable program and you use the parameter statement or select option statement. So let's say for example you are using the parameter statement and then you executed the report program, and then you get to see one input field where user can enter some value. So user has entered some value in the selection screen. Execute it. Now when user enters some value in the selection screen and click on execute, so when you execute it you are going to display the output. So now when you are going to display the output, let's say for example material type. Okay, I have a parameter statement on material type, so that when I execute the program I get to see material type input field in the selection screen. Now when I execute it, I want to see all the material details which are satisfying the material type. So now I will write a select query. In the select query, in the where condition, material type equal to the parameter which I have used to display the selection screen. Okay, so it means the value entered by user in the selection screen is getting stored in the parameter statement, parameter variable. Okay, so similarly here also in Web Dynpro ABAP you design the screen layout, but where is the information is getting stored? I mean, let's say for example, if it is input field in the Web Dynpro ABAP, you have designed a input field, but in input field, when user enters some value, it should get stored somewhere. So that is what the context. So when user enters some value in the input field, the value entered by user is getting stored in the context. Or let's say for example, another example. Now you are going to display the data into some you're going to display the data in a Web Dynpro application. How the data will be displayed in the Web Dynpro application? So there should be a source of data. The source of data is context. So now so now to accomplish all these scenarios, we do context binding. So binding the context elements to a UI element is called as context binding. Binding the context node or context attributes to UI element is called as context binding. So I will show you. Let's say for example, now I have already told you how to design the screen layout. Just right click on the root UI element container, click on insert element. Now I'm just going to design the screen layout. Text view, there is a UI element called text view. So text view UI element is used to display the text in display only mode. Okay, text view is display only mode. If you want to display some text in display only mode, we will make use of the text view. Or when you have I mean if you are willing to display a label beside the input field, there is a UI element is also called as label. Okay, so label is also display only. So just click on OK. Yes, now I want to define a text. Okay, or if you don't define the text, it will automatically come when you assign the label for. So now I'm just right clicking on it, again click on insert element, input field, Okay, so there is a UI element called input field. Okay, just click OK. Yes. Now this input, what is mean by input field? Input field which allows the data, user can enter the data in input field. So now when user enter the data in input field, it should be stored in somewhere. So that is context. So now let me do the context binding for this input field. So here you see input field has these many list of properties. So the mandatory parameter is value, obligatory binding is missing, so you should have the context binding done. Okay, so we are going to do the context binding to the value property of input field. If you just don't do any context binding to this UI element, while checking or while activating, it will throw a error message saying property value of element input inp is the id of the input field, must be bound. See, input inp. So this is the input field UI element name. Okay, so property value. Okay, just come to property value. This is the value property. So context binding should be done, obligatory binding is missing. So just click there. You see we have done the internal context mapping. So we have context available here. Select any field Matner, just click OK. Okay, so now just click on save. Now just check. Now this error will go away. Now property, this is information message, property label for of element text does not contain a value. Now just go here. Now see, label doesn't have any text displayed till now. Now what you can do is, here you will see label for. In this label for, you can select input field inp. Okay, now you see it has come automatically, text has come automatically. How this text has come? This text is coming from field label of data element. Okay, you maintain the field label in data element. Okay, let me go there, /os11 Matner. Yes, you can see this field label in data element. So the text is coming from data element. Okay, see, this is auto translatable, it will support the translation also. Okay, so now let me just save it and let me activate it. Now let me create a Web Dynpro application to see the output. Just click on save, local object. Now right click on the Web Dynpro application and click on test. Yes, now you can see the screen. You have the input field and beside that you can see the label. Okay, yes, now user can enter some value. Click F4 and you also see F4 is coming automatically because the search help is assigned to a data element. Okay, search help is assigned to a data element. In further characteristics you can see search help is assigned, so that is why this is displayed automatically. Okay, you can see that value is coming now. Okay, now let us do the page header also. click on in the right click on root UI element container, page header UI element is there. Okay, so now title, save and activate. Now you just go here and just refresh this. Now you see this input field is displayed here, and welcome to Web Dynpro ABAP training page header is displayed on bottom. So now we should correct this. Okay, so how to correct this? Let's see. You can just, if you want to move the placement of UI elements, you can move it. Just right click on it and then just click on up. Okay, just please observe, you can move it up. Okay, now you can see it has been changed the position. Activate it and just now refresh this. Okay, let me open it. Open a new application. Test. Yes, now you see the difference between previous and now. See, this is the previous and this is the current. So this is the proper layout now. So page header should always be on top, and then you can see input field and label. Okay, so now this is fine. Okay, so now what you are doing, if you want to design the screen layout, you are able to do it by just clicking on the root UI element container and right click on insert element. This is everything is fine. But now in case when you have huge number of fields to be designed in the screen, how do you do that? Okay, if you have 10 fields or 100 fields to be displayed in the screen layout or to be designed in the screen, how do you do that? That we are going to do it now. Okay, just go to the context and just, okay, here we have 1 2 3 4 5 context attributes are there. So I'm just doing the context mapping again, dragging and dropping. Yes, do you want to copy and map material details 1 mapping for root node? Yes. Okay, now you can see material details 1 node also. Okay, now I'm just save it, go to layout. Now what I'm going to do is, instead of right clicking on the root UI element container and clicking on insert element, at one shot I'm going to design the screen layout with 5 fields. Okay, so what I will do is I will just click on create container form. Okay, I have a second option, click on create container form. Okay, now just click on context, just select the required context node, material details 1. How do you want them to be displayed? You want them to be displayed as input field, you want them to be displayed as link to action, link to URL, all these available. So I will select input field. Okay, standard property value. Okay, so these are the context attributes available. So here you see binding, context binding. I mean, by default all the context attributes binding is selected. Click OK. Please follow me. Okay, okay, now you can see. Okay, just save and just activate it. Okay, right side you can see root UI element container matner 1, root UI element container matner. This is label. So this is label, you can see label properties. and this is input field. Okay, in one shot I have created 5 input fields. I mean, if I have to create one by one, I have to just right click on root UI element container and say insert element 10 times, 5 labels, 5 input fields. So 5 into 2, 10 times I will have to click on insert element. So instead, with one single click, I have placed 5 input fields in the screen layout. So this is how you will be doing in the real time project when will you have multiple UI elements to be displayed in a single screen. Okay, so now just click on save and then just activate it. Now let me open the a new application. Okay, now here you can see you have material, you have created by, you have changed by, material type and material group. Okay, what were the previous applications? Yes, this was the application where there was only one input field, but here we have 5 input fields. Okay, so this is what creating multiple input fields at one time with one single click in a screen layout. Okay, so now until here everything is fine. I mean, and now the from Web Dynpro ABAP perspective, I mean, since it is web enabled, so users are more concentrated about the look and feel of the Web Dynpro applications. Look and feel. So look and feel should be smart, and look and feel, I mean, smart in the sense like it's not human being, it's application. Application should look like, I mean, properly aligned all the UI elements. Okay, so how to align the UI elements in a Web Dynpro application? So that we will see now. Okay, so let me just go to Web Dynpro component. Okay, here you can see root UI element. Under root UI element container you have multiple UI elements. So to align the screen fields, to align the UI elements in screen layout, we have property called layout. We have a property called layout. So there are 5 different layout types: flow layout, form layout, grid layout, matrix layout and row layout. Okay, flow layout, form layout, grid layout, matrix layout and row layout. Okay, so SAP recommends, SAP best practices says use the matrix layout while designing the screen layout, because matrix layout will improve the performance of the application. Okay, matrix layout will improve the performance of the application. So we will see one by one by selecting the layout type what is the impact in the screen layout. Okay, now let me, currently by default the layout is chosen as flow layout by the SAP Web Dynpro framework. So now if I change the layout to form layout, what will happen? Please observe me. Okay, I'm just selecting it as form layout and then just clicking on save. Okay, now you can see this impact immediately. Now just click on save and activate it. Display errors. The sum of column spans in form layout row 1 exceeds the column count. Okay, so form layout is the layout type which is provided with EHP5. Okay, till EHP4 there was no layout type called form layout. So form layout is something similar to Adobe Forms. Okay, in Adobe Form, while designing the form, how do you design the form? So this layout type will consider such format. So now let me select the another layout type as grid layout. Okay, so if I select the grid layout type, what will happen? I'm just selecting the grid layout. So just click on save. Yeah, you will see the impact immediately. Yes, you can see. Okay, now just let me activate it. And now let me just open the application. Yes, this is the grid layout. I will show you the flow layout. So this was the flow layout. So when you select the layout type of the root UI element container as flow layout, so this is how the application was looking like. But this is grid layout. Okay, when you select the layout type as grid layout of the root UI element container, so this is how the fields label UI elements were displayed. Okay, now what we will do is we will select another layout type, matrix layout. Okay, now I'm just going to select the matrix layout, just clicking on save. Okay, and now just activate it. Okay, here in case of matrix layouts, we have two sub properties available, matrix data and matrix head data. Okay, if you just select the UI element, okay, here you can see layout data as matrix data and matrix head data. The purpose of this layout data, matrix data and matrix head data is, let's say for example, let me go again into ABAP programming. In ABAP, use during write statement is used to display the output. Okay, so now write statement can be written in different ways. Write normal variable. If you want to use multiple variables, then write colon and variables. And now if you use write colon slash, what is the purpose of slash? If you specify this slash symbol, that means the output will be displayed in the new line. Output will be displayed in the new line. So here also the matrix data and matrix head data will behave the same fashion. If you select the matrix data, that means display the output in same line. If you select the matrix head data, that means display the output in new line. Okay, so now I'll show you. Currently this is how the application is look like. Now let me just let it be matrix data only. Let me just activate it. Now I will execute the application. Test. Okay, so now this is how the application is looking like now. Welcome to Web Dynpro ABAP training. Page header and input fields labels are on same line. Okay, are appearing on the same row. So now if I say what I will do is I will select the root UI element container matner label as layout data, matrix head data. What I said if you choose the layout data as matrix data, that particular UI element will be displayed in the same line. If you select the matrix head data, that will be displayed in the new line. So now I am selecting the matrix head data. Now I can just press enter here only. Yes, now here you can see this. Okay, now again press save, activate it. Now I will open the application, test. Yes, now you can see this. Welcome to Web Dynpro ABAP training. But these appeared in the next line, but you can see the gap between material UI element and input field UI element. Material label UI element and input field UI element. This has happened because all the UI elements are in same container. All the UI elements are in same container. Okay, so now if you want to align the screen properly, we can make use of the transparent container. We can make use of the transparent container. Transparent container is a container where you can embed multiple UI elements. So now I am just going to create a transparent container UI element. Just right click on root UI element container, click on insert element. Since I have to create only one element, I can just right click on it and then say insert element. Okay, transparent container 1. Okay, transparent container, this is one another UI element, transparent container UI element. Just click OK. Yes. Now what I will do is I will just put all these UI elements except page header. I will put all them into transparent container. Just see, dragging and dropping. Just drag and drop it in the transparent container. Okay, so drag and drop it in the transparent container. Select it and drag and drop it in the transparent container. Okay, now like this I will just do drag and drop in the transparent container. See, drag, select it, drag and drop in the transparent container. So this is how we will have to align the screen fields to improve the look and feel of the Web Dynpro application. So I'm just placing one by one UI elements into transparent container. Okay, so now I'll just place them. Okay, so now this is the page header and now transparent container. Here you can see again for every there are 4 different containers. One is root UI element container, that is top of it. So this is by default comes up when you create a Web Dynpro component. Now the another one is transparent container. So transparent container is a container where you can embed, where you can place multiple UI elements, where you can combine multiple UI elements. So like this, under this transparent container we have placed all these UI elements. Okay, so the other one is tray and the other one is group. Okay, transparent container, tray and group, these are different UI elements where you can combine multiple UI elements. Okay, so the look and feel of the each UI element is differs. Okay, so now for this transparent container I can set the layout. I will select it as matrix layout. Okay, so I will select it as matrix layout and the layout data as currently it is matrix data, so that is why both are displayed in the same row, same line. Now I am just going to select the layout data as matrix head data. Now you can see both, I mean the page header is displayed on top and then the other fields are displayed in the second row, but I still can design the screen. Now let's say let me just save it and activate it. Let me execute the Web Dynpro application so that you can see the difference in the application. Yes, so this is matrix layout. Okay, now so this was the flow layout and this is the matrix layout. This was the flow layout and matrix layout, but the only difference between flow layout and matrix layout is in matrix layout you have two sub options. They are called matrix data and matrix head data. Okay, so now let me just go to Web Dynpro component. I still can improve the look and feel of the Web Dynpro application by doing this. Okay, now what I want to do is if I want to get the changed by from changed by label, if I want to take them into the second row I can just bring them into the second row by selecting the layout data as matrix head data. Currently layout data property of this enum field is matrix data. So if I select it as matrix head data, that will automatically come into the next row. Just see this. Okay, or I'll just put it in the matrix data only. Just press keyboard enter after selecting the layout data. Now what I will do, from here I will select it as matrix head data. Okay, so I will just save it, activate it. Now I will execute the application. latest. Now see, there is a good improvement from old application and new applications. See, this was the first application, this was the second application, and this is the third change that we had done, flow layout, and this is grid layout, this is matrix layout but without any alignment. After some alignment, this is some improvement, and this is latest. You will see the improvement. Okay, you still can improve. I mean, the only thing is you will just have to play with the properties of UI elements. Okay, you best have to make use of the available UI elements. So that's how you can align the screen fields. Okay, so now another thing what I can do is I will set the root UI element container height and width to 100%. Okay, I can set the you always say 100%. Okay, 100%. Now for transparent container also you can say width as 100%. Okay, now save it and activate it. Now I'm just refreshing it, F5. Okay, it's still good. Let me do one thing, stretched horizontally. Okay, now this also I'll do stretched horizontally, save it and activate it. Now let me just refresh this. Now you will see when I stretch it horizontally, the fields are aligned like this. Okay, so now you will see a proper look and feel of the Web Dynpro application. So now you can put them in three different, if you want to put UI elements in 3 columns or 4 columns, that you can just play with the properties of UI elements. So now I have 3 columns. I have 3 columns in a Web Dynpro application. If you want 4 columns, you can just set it as 4 columns. If you want only 2 columns, you still can set it as 2 columns. Okay, now you can play with the Web Dynpro application UI elements properties. Okay, so still, and another little bit improvement, what I can do is right click on UI element, click on insert element. I can use horizontal gutter. So the purpose of horizontal gutter is basically horizontal gutter. The purpose of horizontal gutter UI element is will provide you some space between UI elements horizontally. Okay, some space between UI elements horizontally. Okay, just click OK. Now I want space between page header and the below UI elements. So I'll just place it on, I'll just move the position up. Okay, up. Now I have to select the layout data as matrix head data because I want it in new line. Yes, you can see here. And now I want the height of the horizontal gutter to be large. Yes. Now rule type should be, if you want the rule type to be displayed or not to be displayed. Rule type, area rule, none, or page rule. Okay, you can select it as page rule. Okay, so the look and feel of the, now I'll just open the application, new. Now you can see, so after the page header there is a underline, now it is better than earlier. So let me just show you the earlier application. This was earlier. Now this. Just please see the difference between earlier application and current application. Yes, there is a good improvement. Okay, so this is how you can change the look and feel of the Web Dynpro application by just playing with the properties of UI elements and by making use of the available UI elements in Web Dynpro ABAP. Okay, so that's all for today's session. We will continue in the next session. Thank you.